A biker paid for a crying girl's gas, a simple act of kindness that shattered his peaceful life. He thought he had left his violent past behind, but one act of chivalry unleashes a storm of vengeance, forcing a legendary enforcer to confront the man he once was to protect the future he now wants. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The air at the Gas & Go was thick with the smell of cheap gasoline and desperation. Daniel Mac McAllister heard the argument before he saw them, the low, snarling voice of a man and the choked, silent sobs of a woman. "I don't care what you have to do, Elena. You call your sister, you call your mom, you sell that damn necklace, but you get me that money now." The man, a wiry, greasy-haired guy named Kyle, spat the words, his finger jabbing into her shoulder. Elena flinched, her eyes red-rimmed and downcast. "Kyle, please, I don't have it. I paid the rent." Mac stood by his old, impeccably maintained Harley-Davidson Softail, the nozzle clicking off in his hand. He was a big man, the kind of big that spoke of past power rather than present softness. His beard was shot with gray, his eyes the color of a winter sky, and they missed nothing. He saw the tremor in Elena's hand, the way Kyle's body caged her against the car door, the raw fear that was a palpable stink in the air. He'd spent a lifetime walking away from other people's trouble. But some stains on your soul, you just can't scrub out. He hung up the pump, his movements economical and deliberate. He walked past Kyle, ignoring him completely as if he were a yapping dog, and went straight to Elena's open window. He pulled a $100 bill from the worn leather wallet in his back pocket, more than enough for a full tank, and then some, and tucked it into the cup holder next to her hand. "Fill it up," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Get yourself something to eat. Then you drive away from here and you don't look back." Elena stared at the money, then up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. I can't." "Yes, you can," Mac said, his tone leaving no room for argument. That's when Kyle found his voice, the sheer audacity of being ignored, of being shown up by some old biker boiled over. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? That's my woman. You think you can just—" Mac turned. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Kyle. It wasn't an angry look, or a threatening one. It was the calm, dispassionate gaze of a man assessing a problem, and the sheer, unnerving stillness of it stopped Kyle dead in his tracks for a split second. But the fury and the bruised ego were too strong. Kyle swung. It was a wild, telegraphed haymaker, fueled by cheap beer and rage. Mac didn't block it. He simply moved his head an inch to the side, the fist whistling past his ear. In the same fluid motion, his left hand shot out, not as a fist, but as an open palm that clamped around Kyle's wrist like a steel manacle. He twisted, not hard, but with an inexorable, practiced precision that forced Kyle to his knees with a sharp cry of pain. Mac leaned down, his mouth close to Kyle's ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the wind. "Son, you have no idea what kind of day you're about to have. Now you're going to sit here, and you're going to be quiet, and you're going to let that young lady leave, or this gets very, very simple for me, and very, very complicated for you. Nod if you understand." Tears of pain and humiliation welled in Kyle's eyes. He nodded frantically. Mac released him, and Kyle scrambled back, clutching his wrist, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Elena was still frozen, her keys shaking in her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Go," Mac said, his gaze still fixed on Kyle. She fumbled with the keys, started the car, and pulled away from the pump, her tires squealing slightly as she sped out of the gas station and onto the main road, not looking back. Mac watched her go, then turned and walked back to his bike. He didn't look at Kyle again. He swung a leg over the leather seat, kicked the engine to life, a thunderous, confident roar that shattered the tense silence, and rode away. He didn't see Kyle get to his feet, didn't see him pull out his phone, his face contorted in a venomous snarl. "Did you get that? Did you see that license plate?" Kyle hissed into the phone. I want everything on him, everything. His name is Daniel McAllister, and he's a dead man." The hum of the tattoo machine was a familiar, almost meditative sound. Mac sat shirtless in the chair of his own shop. Iron Legacy, as his friend and former club brother Paul worked on finishing a detailed, old-school eagle on his shoulder. The shop smelled of antiseptic and ink. "So you just gave her $100 and folded the little punk like a lawn chair?" Paul chuckled, his own arms a canvas of faded ink and old stories. He was a few years younger than Mac, his smile easier, but his eyes held the same knowing glint. "Didn't fold him, just persuaded him to reconsider his life choices," Mac grunted, the needle buzzing into his skin. "Same old Mac, can't walk past a stray puppy." Paul shook his head. "You know, for a guy who wants to be left alone, you sure have a knack for attracting flies." "It was a moment, Paul. It's over." But it wasn't. Later that evening, as Mac was closing the shop's roll-down shutters, a beat-up sedan pulled up across the street. It sat there for a long time, the driver obscured by the glare of the setting sun on the windshield. A cold finger traced a path down Mac's spine. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in years, the primal awareness of being hunted. He didn't confront them. That was the old way. Instead, he went inside, locked up, and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. He stood in the dark of his apartment above the shop, looking out the window. The car was gone, but the feeling remained. The next day, Elena walked into his shop. The bell above the door jingled, and there she was, standing nervously in the doorway, the afternoon light framing her. She looked different without the tears, softer, with warm brown eyes and dark hair that fell around her shoulders. She was holding a small paper bag. I wasn't sure if this was the right place," she said, her voice hesitant. "The guy at the auto shop down the street said the biker with the gray beard owned the tattoo place." Mac put down the sketch he was working on. "It is. I wanted to thank you. Properly." She approached the counter and placed the bag on it. Inside were 2 fresh, still warm cinnamon rolls from the bakery down the block. "And pay you back." She laid 5 $20 bills on the counter. Mac pushed the money back towards her. "Keep it. Please, I need to." Her eyes held a determined glint. "I left him. I'm staying with my friend Stella. I got my old job back at the diner. I'm not taking any more handouts." He looked at her, really looked at her. There was a strength there, buried under the fear, that he respected. He nodded slowly and took the money. "All right. Thank you." An awkward silence hung between them, charged with the unspoken memory of the gas station. "Is your wrist okay?" she asked, noticing the faint red mark on his knuckles. He almost smiled. "It's fine. His face broke its fall." A genuine, surprised laugh escaped her, and the sound seemed to light up the dim shop. "He's an idiot, but he's connected. He runs with some bad people. I'm worried he's going to try something." "Let him worry about me," Mac said, his tone flat. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elena shivered, but not from fear. There was something about this quiet, dangerous man that was both terrifying and irresistibly magnetic. "Well, I should go. My shift starts soon." After she left, Mac stood for a long time, looking at the cinnamon rolls. He broke off a piece. It was sweet, messy, and good. A simple, normal pleasure. A pleasure he felt, with a sinking certainty, was about to become a rare commodity. The call came 2 nights later. It was Paul. "Mac, you need to get down to the roadhouse, now." The urgency in his friend's voice brooked no argument. The roadhouse was a bar on the edge of town. A neutral territory where various factions, bikers, truckers, locals, coexisted in a tense, beer-soaked truce. When Mac walked in, the familiar smell of stale beer and sawdust hit him. The conversation dipped for a moment as people recognized him, then quickly picked back up. Paul was at a corner table with 2 other men. They were older, like Mac and Paul, but they carried themselves with an air of unshakable authority. They wore vests, but not the full colors of the club. These were the diplomats. One was David, his hair now silver but his gaze still sharp enough to cut glass. The other was James, a mountain of a man with a calm, almost gentle demeanor that belied his reputation as the most feared negotiator in the state. They were high-ranking members of the Iron Dragons, the club Mac had helped build, and from which he had walked away. "Mac," David said, nodding to the empty chair. "Sit." Mac sat. "David, James, this is a long way from home." "We heard a rumor," James said, his voice a low bass rumble. "A very specific rumor, that someone was asking questions about Daniel McAllister. Not just any questions. The kind of questions that get people killed." Mac's blood ran cold, but his face remained impassive. "What kind of questions?" "About the old days, about the Chicago job, about the reason you left." David leaned forward. "Mac, the people asking these questions, they're bottom feeders, a small-time crew out of Reno called the Vipers. But they're ambitious, and stupid, and someone has given them a name to chase. Your name." So Kyle had talked to his connected friends, and they, in their monumental stupidity, had decided that taking down a legend like Mac the Knife was their ticket to the big leagues. James took a slow drink of his beer. "The Vipers think you're a prize to be won. They don't understand that poking a sleeping bear just makes it hungry. But if they keep poking, they're going to start a war we've all been happy to avoid. The Dragons have a understanding with the families in this territory. The Vipers are upsetting that balance." "This is my problem. I'll handle it," Mac said, his voice tight. "It stopped being just your problem the moment they spoke the name Iron Dragons in the same breath as their half-baked plan," David replied calmly. "We're not here to take over, Mac. We're here to remind you. You walked away from the Empire, we respected that. But the Empire doesn't give up its legend so easily. You were one of us. You are one of us. And if these Vipers want to dance, they're dancing with all of us." It was a promise and a threat. The club was offering its protection, but it was also reasserting its claim. Mac was a retired king, but in their eyes, he would always be royalty. You don't get to just resign from the throne. As they spoke, Mac's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "It's Elena. I think someone was just watching Stella's apartment." The two worlds were colliding. The past he'd buried was clawing its way out of the grave, and it was threatening the first flicker of something good he'd felt in a decade. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I appreciate the heads up." James gave him a long, level look. "Be careful, brother. Stupid men with something to prove are the most dangerous kind." Mac walked out of the roadhouse into the cool night air, the weight of his past settling on his shoulders like a familiar, heavy coat. He pulled out his phone and texted Elena back. "Where are you now?" "At the diner. My shift just ended. I'm about to walk home. Stay there. I'm coming to get you." He didn't know why he said it. It was a complication, a vulnerability. But the thought of that fear returning to her eyes because of him was unacceptable. He kicked his bike to life, the engine's roar a declaration of war in the quiet night. The monster was awake. The neon open sign of the all-night diner cast a pink and blue glow on the wet pavement. Elena was waiting just inside the door, huddled in a light jacket. When she saw him pull up, a visible wave of relief washed over her. She hurried out and climbed onto the back of his bike without a word, her hands tentatively resting on his waist. "Where to?" he asked. "Just not Stella's, not tonight." He nodded and took her to the only place that felt like a fortress, his apartment above the tattoo shop. It was a sparse, masculine space, exposed brick, a large, comfortable couch, a professional-grade kitchen he actually used, and a wall of books that surprised her. There were no photos, no memorabilia. It was the home of a man with no past. "This is nice," she said, looking around. It's a place to sleep, he said, going to the kitchen and filling a kettle. Tea? Please. She wandered over to the bookshelf. History, philosophy, a few well-worn books on motorcycle mechanics. You read a lot. Quieter than television? The charged silence returned, filled only by the sound of the kettle heating up. She turned to face him, leaning against the bookshelf. Who are you, Daniel? Really? The guy at the gas station. Kyle's friends are scared of him. But they're not scared of you. They're obsessed. He poured the hot water into 2 mugs. It's a long story, and it's not a good one. I have time. Her voice was soft, inviting. And I think I need to hear it. He brought her the tea. Their fingers brushed during the handoff, and a jolt, sharp and electric, passed between them. Her eyes widened slightly, and he saw the pulse quicken at the base of her throat. He could smell her perfume, something light and floral, a stark contrast to the scent of leather and ink that permeated his world. He sat down in a worn armchair, and she curled up on the couch opposite him, tucking her feet beneath her. A long time ago, I was part of a club, the Iron Dragons. I wasn't just a member. I was a problem solver. He chose his words carefully, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble in the quiet room. When there was a dispute that couldn't be settled with words, they sent me. When someone betrayed us, they sent me. I was good at it. Too good. I built a reputation. They called me Mac the Knife. Elena listened, mesmerized, her tea forgotten. This wasn't the story of a thug. It was the confession of a warrior king. There was a job in Chicago, a deal gone bad. People died. One of them was a kid, a bystander. Mac's eyes grew distant, looking at a horror only he could see. That was the day I put the knife down. I walked away. I built this life. I thought I'd buried that man. And now Kyle and his friends have dug him up, she whispered, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. They think he's a trophy. They don't understand that he's a weapon. He looked at her, his wintry eyes finally showing a flicker of emotion, a deep, protective fury. And now they've seen you with me. That makes you a target, and that I cannot allow. The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming. It was a look that promised violence and sanctuary in equal measure. Elena stood up and walked over to him, stopping just in front of his chair. She placed her hand on his, where it rested on the arm. You are not the monster they think you are, she said, her voice firm. The monster wouldn't have paid for my gas. The monster wouldn't have shown me kindness. You're a good man. Daniel. A dangerous one, yes, but a good one. He looked up at her, at the fierce conviction in her beautiful face. He saw no fear of him, only a profound understanding that shattered the walls he'd spent a decade building. He stood up, his large frame dwarfing her. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. Elena, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a claiming, a confession, a desperate collision of 2 lonely souls. It was filled with all the pent-up passion of his quiet years and all the desperate hope of her newfound freedom. Her arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, her body molding against his. The world outside, with its vipers and its dragons and its looming threats, ceased to exist. There was only this, the heat, the taste, the overwhelming rightness of it. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together, the air crackled with the aftermath. Stay, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Stay here tonight, with me. She answered him with another kiss, deeper this time, her hands sliding under his shirt, exploring the hard planes of his back, the ridges of old scars that told stories she was only just beginning to understand. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her to his bedroom, a sanctuary that had never known the light of another person. The world and its dangers could wait until morning. The morning light was a stranger in Mac's bedroom. It filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the rumpled sheets and across Elena's sleeping form. Daniel lay on his side, propped on an elbow, just watching her. For the first time in a decade, the silence in his head wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Her dark hair was fanned out on his pillow, her breathing deep and even. The sight of her there, in his space, in his bed, felt more dangerous and more right than any firefight he'd ever walked into. He slipped out of bed with the practiced silence of a man used to leaving without waking anyone. He pulled on a pair of jeans and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life, its familiar ritual a grounding force. But the peace was fragile, a soap bubble shimmering in the air. Last night had changed everything. He had a vulnerability now, a soft, warm center he'd have to armor with everything he had. He was staring out the window at the quiet street below when he felt her arms slide around his waist from behind. She rested her cheek against his bare back. "You're thinking too loud," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. He turned in her embrace, his hands settling on her hips. She was wearing one of his t-shirts, which swallowed her petite frame, the collar slipping off one shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and free of the fear he'd first seen in them. "Just planning the day," he lied smoothly. She saw right through it. Her smile was soft, knowing. "Liar." She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "It's okay to be worried. I am too. But we're in this together now, right?" The "we" landed in the center of his chest with the force of a physical blow. He'd been a "we" once, with the club. A brotherhood of blood and loyalty. This was different. This was a "we" that was just them. It felt terrifyingly fragile and stronger than steel all at once. "Right," he said, his voice gravelly. He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, lingering promise. "But together means you listen to me, no arguments. This isn't a game, Elena." "I know," she said, her expression sobering. "I saw what you did to Kyle without even trying. I'm not an idiot." The buzz of his phone on the countertop shattered the moment. It was Paul. "They're here," Paul said without preamble, his voice tight. "2 carloads of Vipers. They're parked down the street from the shop, just sitting there, making their presence known." Mac's whole body went still, the predator sensing the hunt. "I see them. You want company?" "Not yet. This is still a conversation. For now." He ended the call and looked at Elena. "Get dressed. Clothes are in the second drawer." While she dressed, Mac walked to his bedroom closet. He moved aside a stack of sweaters to reveal a heavy, long metal box bolted to the floor. He punched a code into the digital lock. It clicked open. Inside, nestled in foam, wasn't an arsenal, but a few carefully chosen items. A matte black Kimber 1911-45 ACP, 2 extra magazines, and, lying beneath them, a folded black leather vest. On the back was the embroidered patch of the Iron Dragons, a coiling, fire-breathing serpent wrapped around a broadsword. The top rocker read Iron Dragons, and the bottom, California. The center patch, the one that denoted his rank, was the Sergeant-at-Arms insignia, a set of crossed batons. He touched the worn leather. It felt like touching a ghost. He left the vest in the box. He took the pistol, checked the load with a practiced snap of his wrist, and tucked it into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back. He slipped one magazine into his pocket. When he turned, Elena was standing in the doorway, fully dressed, her eyes wide. She'd seen the gun. "Daniel." "It's just a precaution," he said, his voice calm. He pulled on a loose flannel shirt over his t-shirt, leaving it unbuttoned to allow for a quick draw. "Stay here. Do not come downstairs. Do not look out the window. If you hear anything that sounds like trouble, you call this number." He handed her a card with Paul's name and number. "You tell him the knife is out. He'll know what to do." She nodded, her face pale but determined. "Be careful." He gave her one last, long look. then turned and walked down the stairs to the shop. He unlocked the front door and stepped out into the morning sun, squinting against the glare. He didn't look at the two sedans parked 50 yards away. Instead, he unlocked the roll-up shutter to his shop with a loud metallic clatter and began raising it, his back to the street. It was a deliberate act of dismissal. An insult. He heard car doors open and close. Footsteps. "McAllister," a voice called out. Mac finished raising the shutter and turned around slowly. 4 men were standing on the sidewalk. They were young, trying to look hard in their cheap leather jackets with a cartoonish viper patch. The one who had spoken was their leader, a guy with a shaved head and a spiderweb tattoo on his neck. Kyle was standing just behind him, a smug, vengeful look on his face. "We need to talk," Spiderweb said. Mac leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest. The movement caused his flannel shirt to fall open slightly, and Spiderweb's eyes flickered down, catching the glint of the pistol's grip. The man's bravado faltered for a fraction of a second. "You're talking," Mac said, his voice flat. "Your little stunt at the gas station disrespected one of our associates," Spiderweb said, trying to regain his footing. "That can't stand. We're a new outfit looking to make a name. You're a big name. We think we can come to an arrangement." Mac almost laughed. They weren't here for a fight. They were here to recruit him, or more likely to extort him under the guise of an offer. The sheer, breathtaking stupidity of it was almost admirable. "An arrangement," Mac repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You think the Iron Dragons would just stand by and let you poach their former sergeant-at-arms?" Spiderweb smirked. "We heard you walked away. We heard they don't claim you anymore." Mac's smile was cold enough to freeze hell. "Is that what you heard? Then you're not listening to the right people." He pushed off the doorframe and took a single step forward. The 4 Viper men instinctively took a step back. Only Kyle, fueled by pure hatred, stood his ground. "Here's my arrangement," Mac said, his voice dropping to that deadly whisper. "You get in your cars. You drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You forget my name. You forget the girl's name. You forget you ever saw this street, and you get to keep breathing." Kyle finally found his voice. "You can't talk to us like that. You old bastard. We're not scared of you." Mac's eyes cut to Kyle, and for the first time, he let the monster out, just a glimpse. The calm, wintry gaze vanished, replaced by a flat, predatory emptiness that promised a swift and brutal end. "You should be," Mac said, and the sheer conviction in those 3 words made Kyle's blood run cold. Spiderweb held up a hand, a placating gesture. "This doesn't have to get ugly, McAllister. We're just opening a dialogue." "The dialogue is over," a new voice said. Paul's pickup truck, followed by 2 other familiar bikes, pulled up and blocked the street. Paul, David, and James got out. They weren't wearing their cuts, but their posture, their collective presence, screamed Iron Dragons louder than any patch ever could. They walked up and flanked Mac, a wall of silent, imposing authority. David looked at the Vipers with utter disdain. "You boys are lost. This is our town. You're scaring the locals." James, the gentle giant, just stared at them, his massive arms crossed. The message was clear. Spiderweb looked from Mac to the 3 new arrivals, his confidence evaporating. The math had just changed dramatically. This isn't over," he stammered, backing away. "It is for you," David said softly. "Tell your boss that if we see any of your faces in this town again, we're not going to talk. We're going to start taking things, starting with your teeth." The Vipers scrambled back to their cars and sped off, leaving a stunned and furious Kyle standing alone on the sidewalk. He looked at Mac, at the 3 men beside him, and the reality of what he'd unleashed finally dawned on him. He turned and ran. Paul clapped Mac on the shoulder. "See? A simple conversation." Mac watched the cars disappear. "They're not going to let this go. They can't. Their pride won't allow it. This just made it worse." David nodded. "Probably. But now they know we're watching. It buys you time." He looked at Mac, his gaze knowing. We heard you have a guest. Mac's jaw tightened. That's none of your concern. Everything is our concern, brother, James rumbled. Especially now. Is she a liability or an asset? Mac turned his head and met James's gaze, his own eyes flashing with a protective fire that was answer enough. David smiled, a rare, genuine thing. Good. Then we protect the asset. We'll be close. With that, the three of them got back into their vehicles and drove away as suddenly as they had appeared. Mac stood alone on the sidewalk for a long moment. The show of force had worked for now, but David was right. It had only bought time. The Vipers would be back, and next time they wouldn't come to talk. They would come to prove a point, and they would come for Elena. He went back upstairs. Elena was waiting by the door, her arms wrapped around herself. She rushed into his arms the moment he entered. I was so scared, she whispered into his chest. It's okay, he said, holding her tight. They're gone. For how long? He didn't answer. He just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against his. He had built this quiet life, piece by piece, a sanctuary from the storm of his past. And now the storm was at his door, and he had something precious inside to protect. The retired king was being dragged back onto the battlefield, and this time, the stakes were higher than pride or power. This was for love. The peace was over. The war was beginning. The silence that followed was the calm before the storm. For 3 days, a tense quiet hung over the town. Mac knew it was an illusion. The Vipers' pride had been shattered in front of their prospect, Kyle. They would have to respond, or cease to exist. He was ready. The attack came not at the shop, but at the diner where Elena worked the late shift. A bottle filled with gasoline and a rag flew through the window, erupting into a fireball of shattered glass and terror. It was a diversion. As patrons and staff fled screaming into the night, 2 cars screeched to a halt outside. The Vipers, armed with pipes and bats, poured out. Their target was clear, cause enough chaos to drag Mac into the open. They never got the chance. As the first Viper raised his bat to smash the diner's door, a single, thunderous gunshot cracked the night air, ricocheting off the pavement at his feet. Everyone froze. Mac stood at the end of the street, silhouetted by a distant streetlight. He wasn't alone. On either side of him were David, James, and Paul. And behind them, lined up in a perfect, menacing row, were a dozen more iron dragons, their engines rumbling like a gathering earthquake. They were all in their cuts, a wall of leather and loyalty. The Empire had come to town. Mac walked forward, the dragons moving with him in a seamless, practiced formation. The Vipers, outnumbered and outclassed, dropped their weapons, their bravado evaporating like mist. Spiderweb, their leader, was shoved forward. Mac stopped in front of him. You came for my town. You threatened what's mine, Mac said, his voice cold and flat, carrying absolute finality. The dragons don't give up their empire, and I don't give up my life. Tell everyone who will listen. This is our ground. The legend you tried to hunt? He's the one who decides when the hunt is over. He turned his back on them, a gesture of supreme dismissal, and walked towards the diner where Elena stood, safe and unharmed, her eyes full of tears of relief. He had faced the monster of his past not by running, but by embracing the strength it had forged. He was Daniel McAllister, a man who had found something worth protecting, and the Iron Dragons, his brothers, who would forever guard the peace he had earned. The war was over before it began, ended by the simple, unshakable power of a legacy that refused to die. Thank you for riding with us on this intense journey. What did you think? Was Mac right to walk away from the club? Or was his past the only thing that could save his future? Let us know your thoughts, and where you're watching from in the comments below. And subscribe for more epic tales from the road.